Today's Rambam, Hilchis Mikvaos, Erik Yud, Halacha Vav. The Rambam talks here about different sfeikis. If a person went into a mikveh, it was a suffix if it was good. Like a suffix toval, suffix late toval. A person went to a mikveh, it's not clear if he was table, he didn't table. Afilu toval, suffix yesh be'arboim so, suffix she'in be. Shnei mikvois, echad yesh be'arboim so, v'echad ein be, v'toval be'echad, v'in yoda be'ezim and toval. A number of different sfeikis. A person went to tovel, and he doesn't know if he toveled properly. Again, it's a shayla if he toveled or not. It's a shayla if the mikveh was kosher or not. There was a kosher and a apostle one, and he went to one of them, doesn't know which one. Whichever way, there's a suffix in his tvila. So the halacha is pashut. The halacha is sfeikei tomei, lefi shahatomei becheskosei, ad sheyodeya or yivoda shetoval karoi. Pashut. There's a din cheskas tuma. The man was tomei. He's a muchzik betuma. Now you want to say that he became toyer. You have to know. You have to know that he became toyer. Calls man, there's a suffix, so you don't know that he's toyer. The mele bleibt der tomei. Then he brings another dugma. And then the Rambam says, Medvar Mamuri, Bishahoisa hatvila mituma chamura, avol im toval mituma kalo. When do we say that the cheskas tuma makes it, even if there's a suffix, you're still tummy because of the cheskas tuma? That's if the tuma was a tuma chamura. But if it's a tuma kalo, keep going. Shochal eichlin tmeyin ishos a mashkin tmeyin. Oibar roishe v'rubi b'mayim she'uvin. The Rambam brings all of these four dugmois. For a tuma kala, lesser tuma, heil v'ikir dvorim elu midivreihem, harisfeke toir kamesha b'yarm. Being that they're only midivreihem, ikir dvorim elu is midivreihem, so the suffix is toir. The afal pishin estapik leim tova lelei or whatever. That's the halacha in Rambam. The general din that Rambam tells us is when there's a suffix on your mikveh, a suffix on the tvila, if it was a tuma chamura, so there's a cheskas tomei, so you remain tomei. But if it's a tuma kala, then even though it's a cheskas tuma, the suffix is enough to make you toyer. Azay zok the Rambam. Zok the Ravid, Omar Avram, v'im hoya av hatuma midivrei seifrim sfeikei tomei. What if it's a tuma dirabonon, but it's an av hatuma? Then the suffix would be tomei, you would remain with your cheskas tuma. So the Ravid adds another thing that the Rambam didn't talk about. Because the Rambam talked about tuma chamura, the pashtus, that means a tuma deiraisa, versus a tuma kala. But the tuma kala, the Rambam gave dugmois that are called a vlad tuma medivrei seifra. The Rambam said a tuma chamura, if you have a suffix, you still got cheskas tomei. A tuma kala, if there's a suffix, it's tohir. Zog the Ravid, but if it's an av tuma midivrei seifrim, then sfeikei tuma. That's what the Ravid said. Now it's very unclear if the Ravid is arguing on the Rambam, or the Rambam is masking, and the Ravid is just being mashlim something that the Rambam didn't say. The signin of the Ravid, all he says, he says a din. Now does the Rambam mechulik on that din or not? So that's a whole parsha. I would like to clarify a little bit. This Shaila Vasa derived the Mesif given, what's the Shitas Rambam, which Vaistes Asada, and the Minyan, Agreser Machlekes. And I want to try to explain the Ikre Hadvorim Biktsor. The din, this whole din of the Rambam is based on a Mishnah and Mikvaos, Mishnah Beis. Where there it says Mamish. It's Mamish the same situation when you have a mikveh and you have different sfeikis. So the din is tummy. You're tummy because if you have a suffix, there's a cheskas tuma. Zok Mishnah medvar mamurim betuma chamura, awal betuma kala. Mishnah says exactly what the Rambam says b'shmoi. If it's a tuma kala, and the Mishnah goes ahead and gives the same dugmois of the Rambam, so then sfeikei toyer. If there's a suffix, you're toyer. And then Rabbi Yosi metame. Rabbi Yosi is machmir even by a tuma kala. Rabbi Yosi imer kol davar shu becheskas tuma la'olam hu bepsulei asheyivoda shetoyer. Rabbi Yosi is machmir. Rabbi Yosi says no matter what, if there's a cheskas tuma, it always remains tummy. Good. The Rambam didn't pass like Rabbi Yosi. The Rambam passing like the Tanakama. Reb Meir, about this Tanakama specifically, the Gemara brings us in Gittin. In Erevin it says it's Reb Meir. Al Kapanim, the Rambam passing like that tzad in the Mishnah, like Reb Meir, the Tanakama, that by a tuma kala, even if there's a cheskas tuma, Nevertheless, a suffix makes you toher. On the parsha, what's the gather of a tuma kala, and what's the reason why sfeika toher, even though there's a cheskas tuma? So, from a number of the Rishonim, the Rash on the Mishnah, and the Bartanura, the Rosh, and Rashi in the Sugya Native, and all of them is mashma that it's supposed to think because it's a drabbanan. That when it says tuma kala, sfeika toher, again, even though there was a cheskas tuma, it's because we're talking about a tuma b'drabbanan, and by drabbanan there's the klal that a suffix by drabbanan is lahakin. That is the shita. Again, the Bartanura says it b'pashtus on the side of the Mishnah over here. The Rash says it b'pashtus. Rashi says it in the Sugya Native. That's the pashtus of all these shittas that when the Mishnah says by a tuma kala, sfeike is toher, again, even neged cheskas tuma, is because it's a tuma d'rabbanan, but d'rabbanan suffix d'rabbanan lohakim. Zok like over the Tesis Yom Tov, and others, the Mishnah Achrena, the Gra, others say, what? Bas epis, they bring in rayas, it can't be that shot. For sure, also by a tuma d'rabbanan, you would say there's a cheskas tuma. Narvas, these examples that the Mishnah brings, these are a tuma she'ein li iker klal min ha'Torah. All the four examples that the Mishnah brings and the Rambam brings are vlodei hatuma that are all from the Yudches Dover that the Rabbanon were geyser. It's in no way connected to tuma d'oraisa. There we say that by a suffix you're Torah even against a cheskas tuma. But if it's an av hatuma d'Rabbanon, to say it's a tuma d'Rabbanon sheyesh li iker, it's based on the d'oraisa. So then we would say sfeike tomi. That is a machlekes in the pshat of the Mishnah. It says in the Mishnah, Rabbi Meir, who's the Tanakama, who says by a tuma kala sfeike toir even against the chazokah. So we have a big machlekes to Rishonim and Achreinim. If Rabbi Meir was mitahir by any tuma d'Rabbanan, that any tuma d'Rabbanan, if there's a suffix, you're tohir even neged the cheskas tuma. Or was it only by a tuma miyuchedes of vlad hatuma she'in le'iker klaman ha'Torah? So it's a machlekes rishenim and achreinim and pshat and shitas Remeir, and that same machlekes carries itself over to the Rambam, because the Rambam is kemata hatokya of the lashon HaMishnah, and the Mefarshei Rambam argue the same way that they argue. The Mefarshim argue in the Mishnah, they argue in the Rambam. The Mashal, the Shar HaMelech, says very strongly that the Rambam means that any tuma d'Rabbanon is sfeike tohir. Any tuma d'Rabbanon is sfeike tohir, even neged a cheskas tuma. Azay the Shar HaMelech learned, andere learn azay. Mashenki in the Prichodosh, and that's also l'chur pshat and kesef Mishnah on the page. They learn that the Rambam only brought dugmois from a vlad hatuma she'en le ikir min haTorah. So mele only such a tuma would you say sfeike is tohir, but an av tuma midrabanon, there would be sveike lahachne. No, it's verstandig that this hago of the Ravid and the Rambam, is it a machlekes against the Rambam, or is he just mashlim the Rambam? Is tolui in this machlekes, which is sai pshat a machlekes in pshat mishnayis, sai a machlekes in pshat in Rambam. Nachamol, if you learn like the shita that the Rambam is paskening, that the Meir is paskening, that any tuma d'Rabbanon is sfeike tohir, so then the Ravid is coming to argue on that, and he's saying no. If it's an av tuma d'Rabbanon, it's sfeike tomi. Mashenkin, if you learn like all those shittas and most shittas, I think in the Rambam, who say that the Rambam is only talking about the vlada tuma she'en le'iker klal min ha'Torah, so then the Ravid is not a machlekes on the Rambam. The Ravid comes and adds, and you should know that av tuma d'Rabbanon is also sfeike tome. So that's mashlim shitas Rambam. The Rambam holds the same way, and he didn't say it over here. Why didn't he say it over here? So we cooked in the Mishnah Melech. He says because the Rambam already said it about somewhere else. Okay, there's a lot of hinun tzrik in this inyan and Kem Ayin Zayin in the Mefarshim, Encyclopedia Talmudis in the inyan of. Cheskas Tuma brings and talks about the shittas, and there's so much to be mine, but that's the Nukudas Hadvorim. So just to sharpen over here one Nukuda. What's the Nukudas Hadvorim? The Nukudas HaMachlekes is a shaila about the din of D'Rabbanan. By a Tuma D'Rabbanan, Ava Tuma D'Rabbanan, a real D'Rabbanan, Derech Klal is a halacha, Sfeika D'Rabbanan is lohakil. That's a klal. What's the story when there's a cheskas isur? There's a matziv that was muchzik with a certain isser, like over here. The person was muchzik to be a tuma d'rabbanan, av tuma d'rabbanan. And now there's a suffix. Did he go into the mikveh? He didn't go into the mikveh. Was the mikveh kosher? Was it not mikveh kosher? So on the one hand, we have the din of sveika d'rabbanan lahakil. That's on one hand. A suffix d'rabbanan, that from mekelzain. On the other hand, over here you have a cheskas tuma. So, and b'derech klal, and everything mukminan acheskose. So we have here two klolim that are l'cheir neged zelozeh. A klal again of sveika d'rabbanan lahakil, and a klal in kolater kula that everything you're mukminon acheskose. The cheskas adin, it had a certain chazakah. Al titzienu misafik. So here's really the yisaid of the shaila. This is the question. It's a shaila l'chu'ura that's much bigger than tumah v'tara. It can have ashlachas in many places, and it's a general shaila when these two inyonim come together. A din d'rabbanan, a suffix in a din d'rabbanan, which the klal is lahakil, versus a situation, but there's a cheskas isur, a cheskas tuma. Do you go basar chazokeh and therefore you're machmir, or do you go basar sveika d'rabbanan lekula and therefore you're maker? Which l'chura, this is the machlekes in pshat and Rambam, and machlekes in pshat and Reb Meir of the Mishnah. But let's stick to the Rambam. It's the machlekes in the Rambam, because the Rambam said by a tuma kala, you could be makel neged achazok, and here you have the big machlekes hapoiskim and amafarshim. When the Rambam said tuma kala, did he mean all tumas d'rabbanan, which would mean the Rambam holds whenever you have a suffix d'rabbanan, you're makel even neged achazok. Or do you all know? Even the Rambam has made that a regular tumah d'rabbanan, a full tumah d'rabbanan, you have to be machmer because of the chazakah, only by a special, unique vlad hatuma. If us can gain after, we always looked at a little bit this as boris hadvorin. What could be the emek hasvara lekanu lekan? What should be gover? The din of mukminon acheskose, and it was as tomei, so it remains tomei until you know it's toher, or it's osir until you know it becomes mutter, or sveika d'rabbanan lekula. As I'm sure there's many ways to learn, to understand, or let's suggest one way or maybe two ways how we could perhaps approach to understand the emek of this machlekes. So one way is efsherazeh, the concept of mukminan acheskose, the concept that a thing had a certain chazok in a certain way, so you don't assume that it changed until you have a raya that it changed. What's the yisoid of that concept? That's really miyusad in the Gemara. In Chulin, the Gemara says, "B'nayin lechazoka min ha'Torah," beginning of Chulin. How do you know the concept that you're mukminan acheskose, that something didn't change unless you know it changed? And the Gemara there says it's from the kohen who sees a nega in a bayis, and then he goes out of the bayis and he says, "Kenega nirli babayis," even though once he's outside he doesn't know. Maybe the nega already got less than the shear, but because a moment ago he saw it with a certain shear, so he can assume it didn't change, and therefore he can say, "Kenega nirli babayis." So the Gemara says, I mean, it's a sugi, but the nukud is that mikan, from here we learn this din, that when you know something is in a certain way, you don't have to assume it ever changed. Now in Pashtus, the gather of that chazakah is not that there's really a suffix, maybe it changed, and we paskin the suffix by saying mukminan acheskos. The Pashtus, the gather of this is called cheskas haguf, that if I know the guf was in a certain way, so I'm mukminan acheskos, pshat is, I don't assume that there's any suffix, that anything changed b'chlal. So davar apusha, that it is the way it was until I know it changed. When you can assume that someone's alive. A shliach goes to bring a get from a baal to an isha. Maybe the baal died, so then shliach can't give the get. Cheskas chayim. This is all what's called cheskas haguf. That if something is in a certain way, we assume it never changed. L'chura, it's not pshat there's any suffix. We're not nisnapik b'chlal that it changed. The nochidah cheskas hadin. Cheskas hadin is the din of this thing was a certain way. Now here already, take our stories. Cheskas hadin. He was tummy, but now he went to mikveh. There's a shaila if the mikveh was kosher or apostle. It's a real suffix. So what do you mean? I have no reason to assume that this tummy is tahir. Sure, I have a reason. He went to mikveh. I don't know if the mikveh is kosher today, but you can't say there's no reason to assume a suffix. But nevertheless, the din by cheskas hadin, just like cheskas haguf, is unless I know it changed, I have to accept it is the way it was. He was tummy. But dok kemenshin klaren and achrenim klaren the churetz machlekes achrenim. If cheskas hadin is the same gather as cheskas haguf, that there's taken no suffix. By cheskas haguf, the kohen walked out of the house and he saw the nega, So for sure, the pshat is that we're not mistapik, that maybe something changed. There's no makim to a suffix b'chlam. Of course, there's a makim for a suffix. I don't know if this mikvah is kosher or treif, but nevertheless, we paskin that we go basar cheskas hadin, though there's a real makim l'suffix. So, I mean, again, you look in the encyclopedia, he brings different achrenim, the chelkes yeya, chuta meshulish, they all say cheskas hadin is a different gather. It's not like cheskas aguf, it doesn't have that power at all. They bring from others, Shari Yesher, Shemishkop, others, that no, it is the same yisoid. Esher, maybe this could be a way of understanding the yisoid of this shaila. Lagabe, the din, when there's a suffix, the rabbanon that we pass in lahokil, versus a cheskas hadin. Can zayin is azeh. If cheskas hadin, the pshat is that we're not mistapik b'chlal, that something changed, like a cheskas haguf, that there's no makam to suffix. That's the halacha. There's no suffix. If there's no suffix, zok sich shein echid nish suffix the rabbanon lekula, because there's no suffix. The Chazoki says that there is no suffix. This is the way it is until I know it's different. If there is no suffix, then why would I say suffix the rabbanon lekula? Suffix the rabbanon lekula is when there's a suffix. So the Mela can sign that this machlekes, which is a machlekes bemis in Rambam Gufin, what does the Rambam hold? This machlekes, if by a din drabonon, which is the din of suffix drabonon lekula, we say that you stay with the cheskas isur and you're machmer or not, might be tolui if the cheskas isur leaves room for the suffix. If the cheskas isur says that there's no reason to have a suffix, so then you have to be machmer because this is tummy. He's tummy. There's no suffix. If there's no suffix, there's no suffix drabonon lekula. On the other hand, if the cheskas isur, it's not a cheskas haguf, it's a cheskas hadin, which is less than cheskas haguf, very likely. So here, if there's a suffix and ukminan acheskose kilo as a response to the suffix, can shenzain no, but if it's a suffix by a drabonon, suffix drabonon lekula. As it can zayin, after one way to understand the machlekes. Maybe b'ktzara one other way to understand. Maybe it's not a shaila in the gather of cheskas isur, cheskas hadin, but maybe it's gar a shaila in the gather of suffix drabonon lekula. Das dort kommen weiter klären, eine interessante shaila. What's the pshat suffix the rabbanon lekula? One way you can learn suffix the rabbanon lekula is that it's like passive, meaning if it's a suffix the rabbanon darf man nicht machmir sein. Suffix the rabbanon, a yid is not mechayiv to be machmir. It's a suffix by the rabbanon. Other we can learn the suffix the rabbanon lekula is like a psak. The rabbanon said when it came to din the rabbanon, if there's a suffix, it's mutter. The rabbanon have nicht weggestellt isurim beifen von suffix. So suffix the rabbanon lekula, the rabbanon said a suffix is not osur. It's not osur with the rabbanon. Not pshat, you don't have to be machmer. Suffix the rabbanon lekula makes mekel zayin. Suffix the rabbanon lekula, the psak is as if a suffix the rabbanon darf man mekel zayin. Suffix the rabbanon is nicht osur. If they can sagen, after them geht the machlekes. If suffix the rabbanon lekula is more of a passive word, suffix the rabbanon, you don't have to be machmer. They say there, but if there's a cheskas isur, so there's another reason to be machmer. Enoch nami suffix drabonon doesn't require you to be machmir, but here there's an ukminan acheskose. Mitzad ukminan acheskose darfst du machmir sein. Suffix drabonon lekula didn't say you have to be mekel. Didn't say there's no mokim to be machmir. Just said you don't have to be machmir. But here there's a reason to be machmir. Ukminan acheskose. Mashekin if sveika drabonon lekula is pshat. The rabbanon said when there's a suffix, they didn't say there isur. Nu kann man schon sagen that was helped me that there's a akminun achaskose to paskin the shaila, but I already paskin the shaila because suffix the rabbanon has a din lekula. He says like the second way we can learn that even if chazak, even if chaska sadin is there's yeda mokim l'suffix. From that way, and it's not either. Even if you learn chaska din mokim l'suffix, it's totally in the gather of sveika the rabbanon lekula. How far do you go? How strong is the psak of lekula? Is it a psak that says don't think further because suffix rabbanon darf bleiben lekula, or it says you don't have to be machmir of misar chazaki kemen nefshiyah machmir zayin? Al these are different svaras was man can verstehen in this machlekes lechura yisoidi about a suffix that's ikir suffix with the din rabbanon with din is lekula. So then gateman b'chaskas isur or denish, which by is a big machlekes hachreinim and apoiskim also in this shaila. Just l'shleimus ha'inyan, just to say because I didn't mention it at all, and it should be known. That this is all in Shittas Rambam, who the Rambam paskins like the Tanakama and Meir and that Mishnah, that they say that by a tuma kala, either it's a drabanan or a vlada tuma, so you don't go basar cheskas tuma, you're matayir. It's important to note that the Rashba paskins like Rabbi Yossi in the Mishnah. The Rashba paskins like Rabbi Yossi that even by a tuma kala, by any type of suffix that drabanan, even by a vlada tuma, that ain't l'shumi k'mediraisa, you always go basar cheskas isser. Those cheskas isser is always greater, and it's not just the Rashba, the Shach in Shulchan Aruch. In Kol Yisrael Ksveika, he brings the Rambam and he says the Rashba is chilik, and he passes with the Rashba. So it's important to note that there are daily apeskim like the Shach, and it's not just the Shach, but they paskin not like the Rambam, and they paskin that you always go basar cheskas isser, even by a drabanan, even by a mamash avlada tum drabanan. It could be because they hold the way we said earlier. That a chazaka doesn't leave room for suffix for anything. So it doesn't matter. There's no suffix b'chlal. The whole and that is the shita of the Rashba and the shita Shach Alocha. But we were discussing because shita Rambam and the shita Rambam. There is the machlekes hoachreinim in pshat in Rambam. Hamirarum geret kama svaris was ken zayin lekan. Why would one say this way or that way in this shayla?